Awesome. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us today for the second series session in the architecture and design strategy sessions for Marketing Cloud. So your host for today, Natasha Gilani, she's joining in from Toronto, and myself, Shibu Abraham from Malaysia. On behalf of our user groups, we would love to welcome you all. And our speaker for today is one of our MVPs for this year, Mateusz Dabrowski. He's joining in to talk about architecting web solutions in Marketing Cloud. Natasha, do you want to go ahead, quick intro about yourself, and then we can pass to Mateusz as well?
Yeah, thanks, Shibu, and welcome everyone. This is going to be a super exciting session. I'm happy to be here myself to hear some of the tips and tricks Mateusz is going to share with us. I'm joining, as Shibu said, from Toronto. I'm the one of the two leaders of the Toronto Salesforce community group. So super excited, and stay tuned with us. We've got a few more sessions after this, and then another series that we're launching. So let's get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Natasha. Over to you, Mateusz. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So as Shibu already mentioned, today we'll be talking about the web solutions, Web Studio to be more specific in the Marketing Cloud. So my name is Mateusz Dabrowski. As Shibu already mentioned, I am this year's MVP and marketing champion. I'm also Marketing Cloud architect in PwC and author at mateuszdabrowski.pl website. And I really like to create fun solutions in Web Studio. Honestly, it's one of my probably favorite parts of the Marketing Cloud platform, along with the Automation Studio. So I hope to show you some of the potential ideas and approaches that you can take when working with the Web Studio in Marketing Cloud. In terms of what we'll be covering today, it will be very, very basic one-on-one of Web Studio, and it will be like one slide, very short intro, just to have everyone on the same page. Then we will jump to the AMP script versus SJS in Web Studio. So which is better in which scenario? Again, very short introduction. And then we will jump into the main course of today, so the Web Studio patterns. And we'll cover the landing page, web form, preference center, and talk very shortly about the Cloud Page App. So a nice nifty trick, how you can abuse Web Studio possibilities. After that, we'll talk shortly about the Web Studio security. And finally, as Shibu mentioned on the chat, we will cover the Q&A. So feel free to ask the questions whenever you want. And of course, I will be jumping to them in the end and answering everything. If I will be able to see anything during the presentation, it will be easy answer. I will try to just put it into the current talking. Okay, with all that, let's jump to the main dish. So Web Studio one-on-one. So again, we will be talking today about the Web Studio, and not even full Web Studio. We will be covering two key parts of the Web Studio. So we'll be covering Cloud Pages and Code Resources. It's not all. In Web Studio, of course, have also the microsites, the mobile push websites, so the interactive sites. There's more, but the bread and butter of Web Studio is Cloud Pages and Code Resources, and you can create a lot of very fun solutions with just those two elements because they are super powerful. So let's start up with the Cloud Pages. And the Cloud Page is a marketing name for the Marketing Cloud-based landing page. So it's just a standard landing page like you can have in any potential marketing automation platform. It can be drag and drop created, it can be code created, so you have full choice of whether you want to go with the nitty-gritty of writing your own HTML or rather just drag and drop pre-made boxes with the no-code approach that Salesforce so loves. And when it comes to the code part, you can use HTML, CSS, JS, AMP script, SSJS, so all the programmatic languages of the Marketing Cloud. Should you even want, you can just import the frameworks, JavaScript frameworks, and work with Vue, React, or other solutions. So it's really flexible solution that you can create nearly whatever you want. It's just the choice of the best tool to make whatever you want to create. One thing to note, and this will be one of the very important differentiations between Cloud Pages and Code Resources, is that by default, cloud pages have some wrapper code around this part that you are creating. So even if your cloud page is just a single code block and there is absolutely nothing more apart from your code block, in the end, in the front end, when you load the page, there will be some additional code, the wrapper code of the cloud pages. So keeping in mind when you are building your solutions, we'll talk about what it means and why it is important a bit later on. The next important element of the cloud pages is the cost. So whenever you are using your marketing cloud, you have a license for the marketing cloud. Each license tier has some bag of super messages that are being used for various events, various activities within the marketing cloud. So email is costing you super messages, SMS is costing you a lot of super messages, priority sending is costing you messages, interactive email is costing you additional messages, super messages. And again, cloud pages also cost super messages with the cost of 1 super message per page load. So it doesn't care about the subscriber, it doesn't care whether there is a real user there at even, just 1 load of the page is equal to 1 super message. Next part, of course, it is publicly accessible, so everyone who will have the URL will be able to access your cloud page. And the URL itself can be SAP branded, so it's up to you whether you want to use the default URL of the marketing cloud, SAP branded URL, or the SSL secured version. Of course, the best practice is to have the branded and secure with the SSL cloud page, both for security purposes as well as for the deliverability purposes when you are linking to your cloud pages from the email communication, for example. Then there are 2 not so great things about the cloud pages. First thing is that whenever you start doing something a bit more custom or a bit more not so standard, like even importing CSS from external place, you will need to ignore what you see is what you get preview, this preview that you see when you are creating the page, because it will not show you the real view. So to see the real page, you will have to just open it after publishing. For very, very simple, very standard pages, it is okay. For anything else, it in many cases will just show you like free text or not apply the external CSS. Next part, ignore the pre-published preview. So in the cloud pages, when you want to publish them, you will see this preview screen. Best practice is to ignore it in most cases, especially after the new experience for the Web Studio, because again, well, it will work fine for very simple pages. Whenever you are starting to build something a bit more complex with either AMP script or SSJS, it will try to not work, or it will show you wrong information, like incorrect or information. So it's always best to just publish this website, check it on the direct final website. Of course, sometimes you don't want to publish your website yet. In this case, it's better to just create a dev cloud page with a different URL and publish it and check it there before publishing the production ready asset. Because again, the previews are the not so good part of the cloud pages. Okay, this is the super fast run through the Web Studio. So let's jump to the second part, which is the code resources. And code resources are super fun because they're actually very, very old part of the marketing cloud. They were already part of the classic cloud pages that were already sunset. They survived because they were too good to kill them all. Officially, they will get out from the Web Studio and will be transported to the content builder. For now, it did not happen. So right now they're still Web Studio. Either way, as long as they are there, and they should be because they are super fun and super useful and have no alternative for them, all is good and we can leverage them. Fingers crossed, if they will move it to Content Builder, I hope the API will be fully available for the code resources as it is for the other Content Builder assets. As for now, it is in Web Studio, so let's check what is the difference from the cloud pages. First one, it is not a standard landing page. It is a solution, marketing cloud solution for hosting snippets. So there are few parts of the snippets that you can do, and it always be code only. So there is no drag and drop solution for code resources. And also there is no front-end capabilities of the code resources. Even if you push HTML there, it will just show you the code. But there are quite a lot of things that you can store in the code resources. And this is the JavaScript, CSS, JSON, RSS, text, XML. So many different solutions that you can host on the code resources. And you can, of course, leverage it later on the cloud pages, just as you do on the standard pages. So by importing, for example, the CSS from the code resource. Again, we'll be talking a bit more about it in a few slides. Super cool thing about the code resources is that you can also leverage AMP script and SSJS. So not exactly hosted, but rather in your, for example, CSS code resource, you can write AMP script to modify your CSS. So you can think about the logics, like, for example, based on the country of the subscriber that is downloading the CSS from the code resource, you may change whether the CSS will contain right to left or left to right order of execution. Or you can import using the API calls from SSJS or AMP script external elements to your code resource. So this possibility of leveraging the AMP script and SSJS on the code resources and execute it there is super, super useful. And again, we'll be covering a bit more about it quite soon. Next thing, there is no wrapper code. So what you have in your code resource is what you will see when you open this page in your browser. No additional head section, no additional elements. Next thing, 0 super messages per load. So there is no limitation in terms of the pricing to how much code resources you are using, which again will be one of the arguments for some of the solutions that we'll be discussing today. It is also publicly accessible, so we'll need to think that whatever you are putting on the code resource, it will be visible if someone knows the URL. It can also be SAP branded just as a cloud page, and there is no preview to ignore because you are just publishing it without any preview, so you don't have to ignore it. Okay, so this is cloud pages versus code resources. Let's jump to second comparison before we jump to the patterns. So AMP script and SSJS, as I mentioned, both those languages can be used in both the cloud pages and the code resources. So which one should you use? As for the AMP script, it is simple programming languages. So it's much easier if you have less experience with the programming. It is very good for simple solutions because you can very quickly get the data that you need and output it to the website. So the very basic use cases that you can think about AMP script in the cloud pages and code resources world is the personalization when you want to add, for example, a field merge, so show a first name on the cloud page, or when you want to look up some data to show it on your cloud page. Dynamic content, when you want to change, for example, a section of your page. One example can be, for example, changing the language on your code on your cloud page. So you are making a lookup to the country or language field in your data model and adapting your whole page to change to the right language for a specific subscriber. It is also very nice for basic data validation. So for very simple forms, you can use it to make sure that the data that someone is providing is correct, or that, for example, when you're pushing some data in the URL or in the post call to the cloud page or code resource, again, you can capture it and check whether it is sensible, whether it is something that you expect and want to use. Finally, it is also good for basic data handling. So if you are getting some data, for example, from a web form or from an email that has a click that sends some data, you can capture the data and leverage it with the AMP script and push it to the data model. But as you can see, there is a lot of simple, basic. And this is exactly the approach that you should take with the AMP script, because as soon as you go with the more complex solutions, AMP script will start to limit you and make your life miserable. Why? Because this is the place where the SSJS is starting to shine. And SSJS is super fun when you have a complex code. Think about, for example, some elements that you need to do multiple times. In SSJS, you can just create one function and execute it whenever you want. In AMP script, you will have to just copy paste the same part of code again and again, and it will make your code huge. And any change to this code will require multiple changes across the whole stack. It is also super fine for complex solution because the more complex the solution is, the more code you will need. And with the AMP script, it will make a really nice book when you want to create, for example, fully blown preference center with the AMP script. So what are the use cases? Of course, everything that you can build with the AMP script can be also done with the SSJS, but also it is super cool if you want or need for your solution to work with the arrays, objects, or functions again. So good ideas to showcase what it means is that whenever you are working with a batch of subscribers, for example, yes, you can do it with the for loop within the AMP script. But with the SSJS, it will be much, much easier because you can just work on an array and get the data from the array, put it back into the array, or even store a different array within this array. For objects, it is just must-have because objects are, of course, the standard element of the SSJS. They are not existing at all in the AMP script. And objects are super useful whenever you want to leverage more complex API calls from your cloud page or code resource, or when you want to get the data from external APIs and work with it. Again, it is possible with the AMP script, but in most cases, you just don't want to try this approach. And then the next part is the complex data validation. Whenever you have a complex form that you need to validate, it will be much, much easier to do it with the SSJS. Whenever you have complex data handling where you need to check multiple things or even external APIs or make some calculations on the data to understand whether it is fine or not, it will be much, much easier with the SSJS. And finally, it is super cool language to create the deployers. So think about, for example, that you have to create exactly the same data extension with the same automation, with the same query studio, with just one word changing between campaign to campaign. You can create an SSJS deployer that will automatically deploy such set of assets within your system to not make you do it manually, save you time, and make sure there is no manual errors when creating such thing. So this is also super useful use case for SSJS and code resources at the same part. I also see the question related to this topic, so AMP script versus SSJS loops. So my take in most cases is that when you are building an email communication or SMS communication, go with the AMP script. It's faster, it will be better. You need very good performance when you are sending communication. When we are talking about the landing pages or code resources, these milliseconds of performance will not make this big difference because normally there is no like 1 million contacts opening the cloud page at the same time. So in this case, the flexibility and power of SSJS will be well worth the slightly slower performance versus the AMP script. Okay, so this is for the AMP script versus SSJS. One last thing that is super important when talking about the more complex solutions on the cloud pages and code resources is that just like with the Automation Studio, you have this auto kill, meaning that when your SQL query, for example, goes for over 30 minutes, it will be automatically killed off and will not complete. The same is the case with the cloud pages, but here the auto kill is 2 minutes. So don't create overboard complex problems because it can just be killed off and will never execute fully. So this is important part to remember. As for the deployers, I think we'll be touching it a bit later, but also, sure, that's an interesting topic. For now, let's jump into the Web Studio patterns, so the bread and butter of today's session, the main part. And we'll start with something very simple, and we'll start going with the more and more complex solutions to see how these potential things can be built with the increasing complexity. So the first option is the simplest solution of ever possible. So all-in-one landing page. So you are just creating a single cloud page. You are using either the drag and drop content blocks or HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all within one page. It just has a static information that shows something. And this something can, for example, be a thank you page after submission or confirmation. It can be an email decision handler. So for example, you can have this email where you are sending a pseudo form, meaning you are showing 3 options. And when the user clicks on one of the options, this selection is handled by the cloud page and saved to your Marketing Cloud database. You can also create one-click unsubscribe pages. So when user clicks in the footer, it is automatically unsubscribed. You can see the asterisk start here because you should not be using one-click unsubscribe pages. You can read a bit more in the recent All Iverson blog post, but to make a very, very short information about it, when you are using one-click unsubscribe, meaning that when someone clicks, he is already unsubscribed, you might make a big problem with your database because many inboxes are using bots right now, especially in the public sector, but also in the B2B sector. And it means that sometimes for a lot of people, you will see that the bot is automatically clicking all the links to check whether they are problematic links. And in this case, when you're using one-click unsubscribe, those users will be automatically unsubscribed without any real action on the human side. So much better solution is to make a 2-click unsubscribe, meaning that one click is in the footer, and then there is a button on the on this landing page to confirm that, yes, I want to unsubscribe. And this solution will be much better for your database. But we'll be showing such use case in a moment. So finally, the next part is showing it how it works on diagrams. So I was telling you there will be a bit of diagrams today. So again, this is super, super simple. You just have a source that is linking to the cloud page. It loads the landing page, and you can add some AMP script or SSJS in the landing page so that on the loading of the website, it will take some data from the Marketing Cloud data model or send some data to the Marketing Cloud data model. So just one push before loading the page, and then the front end of your experience is being loaded. Super simple stuff. So when it is useful and good idea, when you want something super simple to create, when you want something super simple to maintain, when you want something that gets job done. Again, this solution is just very basic of what you can create in the Web Studio. The bad part, if you have many of such solutions and you want to make some global change because, for example, your company changed the branding and now the color is not white, but slightly off-white, and you need to apply this change to all your assets, it will be labor intensive because you will have to go through all those single all-in-one cloud pages and update the CSS there. Okay, so what we can do about it? We can go with the second pattern, which is the modular pattern. This is using already 2 assets. So one cloud page and code resources, because maybe there will be more depending on what your needs. You can again use either the content blocks or code your solution straight away with HTML, CSS, and JS. It will again be static information. So here, no changes from the previous part. The use cases are exactly the same as previously. So thank you page, decision handler, or one-click unsubscribe. But the diagram will be slightly more complex because now the idea is that you can move some parts of your cloud page into the code resource. So for example, the most popular use case is that you are creating a single CSS file for every cloud page on your instance, and you are creating a single or few JS, JavaScript code resources that will be handling all the interactions without your solution. And this allows you to not only make the landing page smaller and more manageable because you don't have the CSS styling and JS that can grow quite a lot in some cases, but also going back to this problem that we had with the previous pattern, it will be much faster to roll out because you don't have to think about CSS and JS. You will just import it from the code resources. It will make updating assets much faster. Again, going with the use case of changing the branding colors, you will just modify one CSS code resource and everything will be updated on all your code on all your cloud pages. And again, it gets job done. So it's a really good idea. However, it's not perfect because because you are using those shared CSS or JavaScript, it means that whenever you are making some changes, you will have much more fun making the testing, because if you change it in a way that breaks something, it will break all your cloud pages across the solution. So which one should you use? Just as I mentioned earlier, it depends. Because if you expect a lot of changes that will across your solution, modular approach is much nicer. If you have just a handful of cloud pages that will be rather without much changes, the first approach will be easier because you will not have to worry about those changes being applied to the CSS, and it will also let you create a different CSS for different pages. But there is also a third approach that is slightly different, but also with the very similar level of complexity. And this is the landing page redirect pattern. And this pattern is quite specific because it is not using cloud page at all. It is using only the code resource. And you can leverage AMP script or SSJS on it. And it depends on how complex you want to build there. And it roles is just a middleware role. So what exactly that means? This means that, for example, when you are building a thank you page, you might not want to lead your contacts to a thank you page within the Marketing Cloud. You might want to send them to your CMS, your main website, for example, so that they have everything else that is super important part of your website. And in this case, instead of putting those contacts into the Marketing Cloud page, you can just create a code resource that will redirect the users to the CMS. Why? Why not just link directly to the CMS page? Because in many cases, you will want to push some information that was happening. So for example, to handle the form. And this will let you do exactly that. So it will be able, this code resource, to capture the information that is in the link or in the post call, do something with it, like look up in the Marketing Cloud or update the Marketing Cloud, push the information there. And once the Marketing Cloud-based logic is completed, it will just redirect the user to the target page without anything that is visible to them, because it will be just a few, like half a second redirect happening. Again, it might be much faster depending on the level of complexity that you will want to build on such a code resource. Same is for the email decision handler. Same is for the one-click unsubscribe. And finally, there's also one additional use case that is super fun, but super complex, that is custom click handling. So for example, there are some use cases that when you want to push the click information in real time to some system, or this is the question from today from the Trailblazer community, what if you want for the link to expire after, for example, 48 hours? You can link to the code resource instead of the cloud page, make a check or logic or API call within the code resource, and then decide where the user will be redirected, whether to the success page or where to late page. So again, using the redirect pattern for code resources is quite fun solution. But again, it requires a bit of coding and applying manually to your places. I also see the question related to storing the content builder code resources in the content builder content blocks. It depends on what you mean, because if you mean that you will be storing everything in the content block and just using it on the code resource or on the cloud page, it might work depending on what is your need, because the main difference between the content blocks of the content builder and the code resources is that code resources have their own URL. So you can go to them, you can leverage them even outside of the Marketing Cloud. And you can play a bit with this URL, because you can, for example, apply the query string to the URL, to the code resource. And based on this query string that is in the URL to the code resource, you can, with the MP script or SSJS, change what this code resource will be doing. So again, it a bit depends on the solution. If you are just thinking about simple CSS that you want to apply to a website, content blocks will be perfectly fine if it is static and without any dynamic parts. But for some ideas, going with the code resource is much more fun. I see that there is a bit more questions, so, and the time is going through, so I think I will go a bit faster with the patterns, and we'll of course go back to the questions later on. So I think we have not yet seen the diagram for the redirect. So again, it's still very simple. You have the source that is linking to the handle code resource. The handler code resource can make some logic to the data model or even to the external data model. Again, it can shoot with the API calls. And then it makes an instant redirect to a landing page or one of the few landing pages on the external frontend. So customer can stay on your main website when you are linking to the CMS. You can have the fully fledged tracking of the CMS, so whatever Google Analytics, Adobe Solutions, or whatever else you have on your CMS, it will all be used there. It lets you integrate everything with the SFMC because you can use the same redirect approach, not even with the email. You can, for example, create a form on the CMS, submit this form to the Marketing Cloud code resource, and redirect back to the CMS. And in this way, you will have both form and thank you page on your CMS, but the data will still go to the Marketing Cloud in real time. So this is also a quite fun solution. Great part, it's free because code resources doesn't cost you any super messages. But of course, there is a bad thing. It requires defensive coding, and we'll be talking about security a bit later on, because not only if there is any issue with the code that you wrote or with the payload that is pushed, it will break and the redirect will not happen, but also because it is much easier to make a malicious use of it. And because if someone learns what is happening with your code resource, he can try to shoot fake data or malicious data to create problems for you. Another super important thing about the redirects is that you will not be able to use try-catch block when you are writing SSJS, because redirects in Marketing Cloud are crashing when they are used within the try part of the try-catch block. There is a bug on the .NET that is a no-fix bug, so all hope is lost. We can just use redirects outside of the try-catch blocks. It also slightly decreases user experience because while the redirect is fast, it will always be a bit slower than going straight to the target page. So keep it in mind and think about whether this solution is worth it. Okay, this covers the landing page part. So let's jump to the web forms. And with web forms, we have quite similar selection of options as we had with the landing pages. So first we have all-in-one. And in this case, again, we have a single cloud page. Within this single cloud page, we'll have form, thank you page, and error page all start within this single cloud page. And we will be changing which is being shown with the MP script or SSJS. It can be extended with this modular approach. So keeping the CSS and JS externally or within the cloud page, it's up to you how you want to build it. And in terms of diagram, it looks like this. So something is linking to a web form. User opens the cloud page form. He submits the form. we are checking, making some validations on the handler side of the context, whether this is the valid submission. And if it is a valid submission, we are reloading the same cloud page with the success text. It can be an overlay, it can be just a different view. And if it is invalid submission, it is a no page. How to build it? It's super simple, because when you are doing this handler part, you can just look for some parts of either query string if you are using the get, or some part of the payload if you are using the post in the form. And SSJS and the MP script can catch whether you are using get or post method, and they can also see what is the payload there. And for example, if the payload is form submission, it can trigger the handler context. And if the handler context responds with success, it can reload page with the query string success and load success page within the same form. So in this case, you have one cloud page, 3 views, and programmatic selection of which view is loaded depending on the URL or payload. And again, of course, it can make a lookups and updates to the data model. The good part, one-stop shop for whole process. So everything related to this specific form is in one single cloud page. And this is the only thing that you need to worry about, apart from the data extensions, of course. Second thing is that you have a single URL pointing to the form view. And whoever will get a URL, it will be jumping to the main web forms view, not a thank you page, for example. There are also bad things. So it will be using multiple super messages per use. So the good scenario, one super message for loading the form, one super message for thank you page with handling the data. And if there is an error, like someone provided a wrong email address, or there is already a submission and you don't want to have duplicate submissions, it will show an error page. Then user will have to go from the error page to the form, submit it again, and the number of the super messages will be growing. So it is important to know that it can eat up super messages much faster. Next part is that it is quite complex structure, because you need to build these conditional structures where, depending on what the user did with the URL or payload, you will show a different experience on the same cloud page. So it adds a bit of complexity and makes the code much, much longer. And finally, it's a bit mediocre user experience, because the user needs to reload the page every time he wants to make some action, because the only way in this pattern to change your page is to reload it with some logic that on the backend side, so on the SSJS or AIM script, is changing the view that is happening. So it's not so good. There is another option. I see a very short question about the page validation. Yes, we can do the validation directly in the form, like the HTML5 validation on the fields, or even JavaScript validation, but there are limits of what you can do. If you want to make a validation against your data model in the marketing cloud, you will not be able to easily / securely push the information, or get the information from your marketing cloud or Salesforce even, to make the more complex validation. And for that, we'll have another pattern in a moment. So the second pattern, 1 in 3, it's quite similar to the previous one, but solves one element. You will have multiple cloud pages. Again, we have form, thank you, and error page, but this time they are separate assets. It can also be extended with the CSS.js as a separate assets on the code resource. And the diagram is slightly different, because now when someone goes to the cloud page form, after the form is submitted, they will get to the thank you cloud page. In the thank you cloud page, there will be a form handling, which will be checking whether we can submit this form to marketing cloud or not. If yes, it is staying on this thank you page. If not, it will redirect to the error cloud page. So what it changes? The good part, it's simple code structure, because you have just a separate cloud page for every need. Second, views can be reused. So for example, you can have just one cloud page for the error view that will be shared across all the forms in your platform. The bad part, again, we have multiple super messages per use, the same problem as with the previous one. And there are multiple assets that needs to view the whole process. So when you, for example, want to check what happens, you will have to jump through multiple cloud pages to see all the content, all the events that are happening. And finally, there are separate URLs for each step of the process. And you need to think about blocking the thank you pages from being visible in the Google, for example, or from being easily accessible by your customers. And again, user experience will be mediocre because again, you will have those redirects that are slowing down the engagement. And then we have the third pattern, the Mvvm, or also called sometimes MVC pattern, that is using the cloud page and code resource. And we will start talking about it with a lot of weird words, and then we'll jump into telling you what they mean. So Mvvm is a shortcut for the model view model pattern. It sounds very smart, but what it means is that you have your database, you have your frontend, and you have backend that is something in between the data model and the frontend. And it allows you to mitigate a lot of issues that we have seen previously. So in terms of Marketing Cloud, cloud page will be the view, so the frontend. Code resource will be this backend, the view model, the part that is the middleware between Marketing Cloud database and your frontend experience. And of course, you have the Marketing Cloud, the data extensions especially, but maybe also the data views, the APIs that are the model. What you can do is you can, thanks to this model, be it asynchronous SPA with Ajax, or to make it a bit more human readable, you can make a single cloud page that can trigger any action that user does using the JavaScript that will be calling to your code resource. Code resource will make a check with the Marketing Cloud, bring back the information to your cloud page, and the cloud page will be able to show something. So for example, it will be able to make a very complex validation in real time asynchronously when the user is filling the form and show an error without any reloads. It will be able to check, for example, what user submitted and change the rest of the form depending on the previous questions. So you can create adaptive forms based on this approach. And again, it can be extended with the modular approach of having the CSS, JS on the code resources as with the previous options. Also, it supports reCAPTCHA because you can host reCAPTCHA on the code resource, on the view model part, and protect your forms from being bot submitted. There are absolutely great articles by Ivan Rasin. So whoever wants to implement CAPTCHA, either the invisible reCAPTCHA or the newest reCAPTCHA, there are great reads with the step-by-step guide on how to build it. Diagram part. So we have the source that links to our cloud page form on submission, but also any other action. It doesn't have to be submission. It can be submitting one form, or it can be just one additional, click or even time spent on the website. You can push this information to the code resource with the form events. This code resource will be talking with the data model in the Marketing Cloud or external APIs as well, and will bring back the information in this Ajax call back to the cloud page. And depending on what is happening in this response coming from the code resource, it can show a different overlays, or it can manipulate the HTML of your page and make all the changes required without any reloads and redirects directly on the same page that the user landed. Okay, so what are the good sides? The good side, one super message per use, because you need to load your cloud page once, but any other event will be zero super message. So you can have 50 different event coming from the forms, like checking something after each single question is answered and pulling the next question depending on the answer to the previous. We still stay on one super message. Second part, you have two assets, cloud page and code resource, regardless of the number of views that you need. You can have 15 different error views, and it will all need just two assets. you have a separation on concerns. So a cloud page is a front end with just the HTML, CSS, and JS. Code resource is your backend with your backend languages like SSJS and AMP-script. And it makes it not only nice and clean that you have it in two separate places, but it also makes it much easier to say, okay, dear front-end developers, feel free to update the view of the cloud page, but don't touch the code resource. The code resource needs to be managed by the Marketing Cloud developers that know what happens in this beautiful mess of the SSJS. Next part, code resources can be reused. So you can create just one code resource backend for the forms and build it flexible enough that it will be possible to reuse it for every single form that you have in your platform. It is good user experience because everything that user does is appearing to him in real time when he does the action without any redirects, reloads needed. So it's super nice for the user experience. It's also super fine because you can integrate external forms. So if we change the cloud page here for a third-party form, the CMS form, you can still shoot with the Ajax to your code resource and still get all the benefits, and even the cost will drop down to 0 super messages for this solution. So this is also a super cool idea. Finally, there is one bad thing, and this bad thing is it's complex to create because you need to separate the concerns, create Ajax calls, secure the solution. And if you want to learn a bit more, I created a nice post about the basics of using the code resources in this way. So for any code snippets and the ideas, you can jump straight in there. Next part, Web Studio patterns on the Preference Center. So here we'll be covering two patterns. One is one-click Preference Center, and this is the simpler one. So it uses the cloud page, of course. It can be using code resource because for the Preference Center, you can leverage any of the patterns that we are discussing just before. So it can be all-in-one, it can be 1-in-3, it can be Mvvm. It's up to you which one you prefer, which one you want to use. The complexity of the solution will depend a lot on what you actually want to do on the Preference Center. So if you just want opt-in, opt-out, it's super easy. If you want to add the publication lists, it will get a bit more complex. If you want to add the multi-channel management and marketing pressure controlling, it will be much more fun to build such solution, but again, fully possible. As for the diagram, you can see we are getting more and more complex, so more and more fast solution here. We are having the Preference Center link click. It can check whether the access is valid, and it's actually a good idea. And what I mean by checking whether the access is valid, it's, for example, that in your Preference Center link click, you can hide some information about the job ID for the email sent, about the subscriber ID, and any other potential ideas that you have. And on the Preference Center, on the load of the page, you can check whether this subscriber ID is in your database, whether this subscriber ID received the email for this job ID, and make some basic validation whether this person should be accepted on the Preference Center. If no, you can push them to the error page. And again, it can be whatever pattern you want from the previous selection. If access is valid, they will go to the Preference Center, and then any preference change can be applied to your Marketing Cloud database. Again, here I am showing the approach with the code resource backend, so this Mvvm approach, which I definitely prefer in most cases, but it equally good can be another solution if you prefer something simpler, but with the cost of the bad things that we were discussing before. So what are the good parts of this Preference Center approach? One, it will be as good or as bad as per the web form pattern that you selected. So depending whether it will be Mvvm or all-in-one, all the same things will be true for the Preference Center approach. It is simple to build because you are just storing everything in your Preference Center and letting the user do his decisions. It's easy to test and debug because you can just click the link and already check whether it is loading, whether the events are happening as you want. So it's quite easy to test, but there are also a few bad things. And one, again, it's depending on which pattern you choose. Second, it requires some Salesforce-based data in the URL. So you cannot link to such preference center from the website, for example, or from any medium that is not Marketing Cloud / Salesforce compatible. Because if you do not know the subscriber key or subscriber ID, whatever you want to use to recognize the correct user, you won't be able to make any changes to this specific user. So the source of the linking needs to know the specific identifier for your person. Next, there is the topic of the security. So again, I mentioned that if you are not making the validation on the click, it's super easy because someone can just try to come up with some IDs. It's long because it's 18 characters, but still you can brute force it, or you can just guesstimate because some parts are constant for this 80 character subscriber key if you are using the contact key. If you are using email address, it's even worse because if the email address is your subscriber key, it's super easy to check the preferences of someone else. And this can create a lot of problems because having the possibility to unsubscribe or subscribe one is the compliance issue for the GDPR or the California law or whatever law is in your country. But if you have a bit more delicate information in the preference center, like for example, whether someone is interested in the publication list of cancer, it can be much bigger issue in terms of the legal problems that you can face. So it is good idea if you have very simple preference center, you are doing some validation and there is no health or financial data in your preference center. But in most cases, it might be a good idea to think about potential solutions to secure it better. And let's jump to such possibility. So what we can do to make the preference center more secure. So again, we can leverage any pattern. Again, the complexity will depend on what exactly you want to show on the preference center. But the next difference is that you will require additional triggered send and additional data extension. And what is happening is that it will require confirmation in the email that you are the owner of the email that wants to access the preference center. And the problem with it is whether you can do it will depend on the country where you are, because depending on the legal system around the data protection and unsubscription processes, you might not be able to use this more complex, more step requiring process. So while it's much better for the security and security of the PII and the data of your subscribers, it might not be legally possible depending on the laws in your country. So always check it. If it will be possible, it will be really fun in terms of what is happening, because in this case, we will have, again, the preference center link click. This link click will be leading to the access request page, where this access request page lets you provide or personalize automatically the email that was used in the email. It will shoot to the, in this scenario, preference center backend to check whether this email address exists in your database. If it does not exist, you can show an error. If it does exist, you can add this subscriber to access request data extension, that is a triggered send data extension. This data extension can be cleared, for example, daily with the data retention, and it will automatically send within 1 minute a triggered send. This trigger send will cover not only the information about the specific subscriber, but also will store a unique code, like GUID, coming from the triggered send. And it will be in form of a button and a link. And when someone clicks this link in this email with unique preference center link, they will be transported to your real preference center page with your preferences, and the validation will happen. If the validation sees that this subscriber and this unique code is not existing in your access request data extension, it will show an error notification and go back to the access request page. If it will see that the data is no longer there because it was removed by the data retention, it will go back to the access request page. And only if this much of a subscriber ID and unique code and the 1 day of data retention is met, it will let user to the preference center and let them make any changes. So much more complex solution, but it makes sure that only the person that has a control of the email address for specific subscriber will be able to see this preference center page and make any changes on the preference center page. But because it is much more steps to go through to make any changes in the preference center, you might need to talk to the compliance. Good idea on how to win against the compliance team in this case is to provide 2 links in your email. One would be this 2-click unsubscribe that lets user very easily unsubscribe from the communication, and also provide a link to the preference center in case they do not want to unsubscribe but want to manage their preferences. Then you will be able, in most cases, to create this longer process and have all the benefits of added security. Okay, good parts. First, as per selected web form pattern. Second, can be linked from any source. You don't need to know subscriber ID because the user will be still providing the email address in the access request form. So it's much more flexible there. It is super secure because the chance that someone will get to the preference center is absolutely minimal. The only scenario that is, I would say, more or less realistic is if someone forwards the access request email to their preference center, which they would have to be very in a specific state of mind to do it if they if it's not their real plan to do so. But of course, there's also the bad things. So as per selected web form pattern, but also it's complex to build because it will be 2 cloud pages with 2 web forms, with the code resource backend, with the triggered send, data extension, additional email with the personalized link. So there is a lot more to digest. But as in most cases, you are building the preference center one time, most cases, I think it's worth doing so to make sure that your subscribers are secure. And finally, it's harder to test and debug that this 1-click because you will have to work through this security solution to make any tests. And of course, it's much more complex to do so with this added complexity. Okay, we are left with 2 last topics for today. First one is Cloud Page Apps, which is a kind of nifty trick that allows you to leverage the cloud pages in your main menu. So the very basic solution is that you can add absolutely any URL you want to this App Exchange menu icon and add it as a, for example, you can see here the survey generator that we built in PwC, or the search app, or the Query Studio that you probably know. And if you do not know Query Studio, it's time to learn it. It's absolutely awesome tool by Salesforce. You can do it with any app. Some ideas, you might want to add a Confluence page with your Marketing Cloud documentation to this page so that everyone can access it straight from the Marketing Cloud. You can add a link to your brand guide so that everyone is creating emails and landing pages according to the brand guide. But also you can link to, for example, a cloud page that will be accessible from the main menu and will be seen within the interface of the Marketing Cloud. Because any solution that you can see here can be opened as a part of the Marketing Cloud with keeping the Marketing Cloud menu bar on top. So it's super, super nifty. And the cloud page is a very nice solution for this type of approach because using the cloud page within this App Exchange icon will let you create a solution that can talk and interact with the Marketing Cloud, can shoot and get the data from the Marketing Cloud and adapt to what is happening in the Marketing Cloud with the built-in solution. So no need to create an API calls from external system. Another super nice thing is that if you would like to go with the cloud page part, you can securitize it. Because if you're using, for example, the Confluence, you don't need to worry about security because the Confluence will have its own login or SSO process. If you're linking to your brand guide, it probably is either public or again, it is on your password protected internal system. but cloud pages are publicly available. So if you would like to create a page up on the cloud page, of course, you need to think about how to make it more secure, to make sure that people that should not have access to your application will not be able to get there. And there is such solution. You can leverage the API methods to make sure that only people that have access to your marketing cloud instance will be able to open this cloud page within the app, which makes it just leverage the same login process as the marketing cloud. And for users that are already logged into the marketing cloud, it will be seamless redirect. Use cases in terms of the cloud page, of course, you can create absolutely awesome dashboards that are feeding on the data that is stored in the marketing cloud or the system data views. You can create a documentation stored on the cloud page about some processes that you are building within the marketing cloud. Or you can even create some template-based generators, or again, some kind of deployers, where, for example, the user can just click 3 buttons and generate a template-based email with a specific set of assets that you are using on your marketing cloud operations approach. So the good parts, again, you can build it depending on the web form pattern that you want. It's super easy way to power up your marketing cloud, because with just adding the cloud page app, meaning just adding the app is like 3 clicks. Making a cloud page app with the SSO is slightly more complicated, but there is already a few guides. I have one guide, but also there are a few other people that love using those solutions and have a few different approaches into how to secure it exactly. But the bad parts, apart from the standard pattern problems, is that if you are using any other approach than the Mvvm, it will use multiple super messages for the authentication. So in most cases, it is much better if you use the Mvvm approach, because then it will be just 1 super message per use of such cloud page. And here is the link to my article on how to create a cloud page app from scratch, step-by-step guide. And I see one question related to the big data. If we talk about the big data, my recommendation would be to create an automation that calculates this data using SQL queries, outputs it to a data extension, and then the dashboard on the landing page would be just a reading form for this data extension, and would just output in a nice format in the table, maybe even searchable or sortable table, the data coming from the data extension. Of course, you can add some additional elements like a button that will rerun the query activity to make sure the data is real time. But I would recommend, if it is truly big data, to not calculate it on every page app open unless it is super important, because it can create a very bad user experience, as the user will have to wait maybe even a few minutes for the query studio or a query activity to complete. So my recommendation, for example, nightly calculate your big data, output to data extension, and show on a dashboard within the cloud page app. Then the last topic for today is the Web Studio security. And as you could see across the previous topics, it is super important because both the cloud page and code resource are publicly available, which means that everyone can go there. So what we can do to limit this element? So the first part is, of course, the most beloved security option by developers, security by obscurity. So just using AMP script and SSJS is already making it a bit more secure, because the people do not see what code is being executed. Of course, I'm not saying this is just using AMP script is making it secure. It's just one of the benefits of using the AMP script and SSJS to make some calls instead of using the, for example, JavaScript. Next part is creating a logic on the payload. So for example, depending on what is being provided in the URL query parameters or in the payload when you are shooting a get or post call to your code resource, you can make a switch or if else statement and make different responses, which will make that only the correct expected payload will provide back any meaningful response back to the requester. And all the brute force approaches will just either see nothing, or you can even be creative and create some fun errors like the IMT-post error, if you prefer so. The next part is the method scoping. So I just mentioned that you can make either a GET or POST request. For example, if your code resource is dedicated only to handling a POST request coming from the form submissions, you can say that, okay, if the method of this opening this code resource is GET, do nothing. And this means that whoever will go to the code resource as open the link in the browser, it will be the GET method, they will see nothing. But if they shoot a POST method, they will get a response. And of course, you can mix and match all those options. But that's not all. There are much better, much more secure options apart from this first section. So you can create the referrer allow list. And this is possible in both SSJS and AMP script, where you can just check what is the referrer of the request coming to your, for example, code resource, and only accept a very specific allow listed referrers. Like, for example, only allow API calls coming from the marketing cloud, or even your specific SAP branded URL to be able to talk with your code resource. You can go even further and create an IP allow list. So again, both SSJS and AMP script allow for it. It is super useful, again, for assets that you, for example, want to be only called from your internal systems. It's, for example, super cool idea when you want to leverage code resource as a backend for your call center program, where the call center can just open a profile of the contact that they are using right now and get some data from the marketing cloud. You can limit this code resource to only work with the IP of your internal system, so that no other platform can make a call to this code resource. You can go with the cookies. And for example, if you are making some redirects, you can just save the information about the possibility to leverage this page in a cookie, and only users with this specific cookie will be able to use this page. Again, it depends on what is the scenario that you want to limit the access to this specific page or code resource. You can make the verification with GUID and data extension. This is exactly the scenario that we were using in this secured preference center approach, where we had the triggered send and data extension and a specific link that is being checked on the opening. So this is exactly this scenario. And finally, we have this Cloud Page SSO, which I would say is probably the most secure solution because it leverages the marketing cloud login as a security solution. But of course, there is this limitation that it works only for your internal users, the users that have access to the marketing cloud. So it's perfect for the cloud pages or the cloud page apps. It's not perfect for any assets that you want your customers to see. And this is all for today's session. It's time for the Q&A. I tried already to answer a few questions on the go, but I believe there were at least a few that I missed during the presentation. So I think it is now time for them. So let me check what I missed.
And Mateusz, if you need some help there, I've got a list of the questions that you missed.
Yeah, sure. So I'm looking through the chat right now.
Okay, I can tell you what they are. Mm-hmm. Did you find them?
Yeah, I see. And there is a question from Marvin regarding how many page views Cloud Page can handle successfully. I don't think there is any official information. I remember one post from Sasha Huwald that was creating a journey builder custom activity on a code resource. And he was talking that about 1 million is more or less fine, but going higher is a problematic. But it's 1 million for nearly single moment views, not for per month. So in terms of per month, there is actually not much problems that I can think of. apart, of course, from your licensing limit. So if you have 1 million page views per month, it will mean 1 million code super messages per month. And this is the question to you, whether you have such a big license for them. If yes, I don't see a problem per month. The numbers that you are providing can be a problem if it would be in one single moment happening in, for example, everyone from one email swarming the cloud page. Okay, I see the love from Bogdan around the MVC design. This is indeed perfect design. I truly like it. I mean, it's complex, it requires more work, but it provides so many nice features. Storing code in code resources might be interesting for testing purposes. Yes, so in terms of storing the code in code resources for testing purposes, I would say that not even in code resources, because code resources can also lag sometimes. Here is one of the places where using the content blocks is super fun, because you can put your code in the content block, make a treat as content for this content block, or just import this content block to your cloud page. And then any change you make in the content block will be automatically refreshed on the cloud page without a need to republish it. It can even be taken to the level up. You can use a treat as content with, for example, your GitHub or your Google Drive, and you can just connect your VS Code to publish your changes to the GitHub. The GitHub would automatically, using the treat as content, publish this information on the cloud page, and then you will have this automatically feed from your VS Code or another code editor directly to the cloud page, where you can just refresh the page and see the changes happen without the need to publish the cloud page, without the need to keep the fingers crossed that this time cloud page will not lag out and we'll see this change. Looking through the questions still. Okay, so I see the question from Vishal about the security topic. So I think we answered it in our last slide. Vishal, if you still have some questions about the security, please put an updated comment in the chat. Then I will come back to this one. Reza was already answered. Okay, so what is the best way to copy multiple cloud pages from one marketing cloud instance to another? Right now, there is only one option, and this is to use the package manager. Because Web Studio for now doesn't have API. There is undocumented API, but it's limited and quite dirty in terms of what you need to do. So my recommendation is to try your luck with the package manager. Package manager can download the cloud pages, can load it back, and try whether it will work with your solution, because it depends on the complexity of your solution and links between those cloud pages and other elements of the marketing cloud. But it's your best bet, I would say. Okay. And then I see a question to limits. Yeah, so there is, I see the information about the number of API calls. Again, I do not know any official numbers. And I suppose that the number of the calls that are happening will be different for the cloud pages and for the code resources, because again, code resources are not only much more lean, but also, I would say, dedicated to being imported in big numbers. So for cloud pages, indeed, it would be better to minimize it. But as for the specific numbers, I'm not able to, unfortunately, I'm not able to answer on any specific numbers for the cloud pages. As for the documentation on Ajax, I see Shibu already answered with the comment. And I think those are all the questions. So if you have anything more, please shoot. Sandeep, the recording will be posted probably in coming few days by Shibu, and I see that he already put the playlist. On this playlist, there is also already the recording of the session from Elliot, and I highly recommend. It's super cool informations about the data model of the Marketing Cloud. So I would say must-have session, definitely recommend.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you so much, Mateusz. I know the session was like super packed. I'm sure everybody loved it,
yes.
especially the different patterns and like how you mentioned the pros and cons. So hopefully everybody will be able to see the recording as well in future. And there's a lot to learn. I'm sure I learned a few tips as well. It was an awesome session. Natasha, anything from your side?
Thank you.
That's all for today.
Yeah, this was a great session. And next, Shibu, you want to show what else is coming up?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, yeah.
Mateusz,
Let me give you back the screen. Yeah.
Sure, awesome. Just a second. Let me take just one second here. Oh, let me go back. Minimize this one. Okay, team. So we have two more exciting sessions coming up this month. One is on June 21st. And the other one on June 28th. As you can see, these are our two duos who are the authors for automating Salesforce Marketing Cloud, which is the book that was launched recently. So Jason is going to talk about integrations, and Greg is going to talk about programming and automations in SFMC. So please do stay tuned for these two. We haven't published the events yet. Hope to do that in the next day or two. Hopefully, we'll publish those on the social media as well. So do RSVP, and we hope to see you all there as well. Okay. Thank you very much for joining in today. I hope you guys all enjoyed the sessions. And thank you very much, Mateusz, for taking time out and much details for all of us, especially around the web patterns that we all look forward to. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.